Welcome. I'm not sure how many people we've got coming in, but we will give it another 30 seconds or so. So we've got a few more people coming through. And then we'll kick off. Great. Where are we going? Okay, so we're going to kick off just in the interest of time. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, where we're going to discuss the triangular employment relationship. So just a few housekeeping bits and pieces. Everyone will be on mute when they come through, so you don't need to worry about that. The session will be recorded, which is great. We will also have a chat function running in the background. Please do pop your chat questions through as Shelley, Georgia and I are talking. We will try and get to them when we can, but we do also have a question session at the end of this as well. So the more questions, the better. So kicking off with some introductions. So speaking today, we have Shelley, Shelley Eden. So with over 30 years in the employment law arena, from the courts to the classroom, and founding Shelley Eden Law more recently, Shelley brings a rare blend of advocacy, pragmatism, and clarity. She specialises in helping organisations navigate complex people issues with confidence and speed. So welcome, Shelley, who will be speaking today. Then we have Georgia, who is one of our hosts, with myself included. Georgia is a lead consultant within Tribe Temp, and she specialises within customer and call centre. Many of you, I'm sure, will have crossed paths with Georgia. Her fast, clean execution is her thing. She communicates early and often, sets clear expectations with both clients and temps, and keeps assignments running tight. So she's known for her transparency, but firm and fair management style. So you can be assured that she places talent that stabilises teams without creating that noise. And then myself, I'll also be hosting you today. So look, I head up the core operations team here at Tribe, which is where the Tribe Temp team sit, and we cover business, customer and accounting support. My team's world is pretty much the engine room of most organisations, and where we work with many of you or our clients. We work to ensure you have the right capability in the place in these kind of areas within the engine room of your organisation. So welcome, and thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Georgia, for hosting alongside me. So what are we covering off today? So the things that we're covering off today is obviously what is the Triangular Employment Agreement? Why does it matter to yourselves, but also to us and to the candidate as well? What about your contracts? Things that you need to think about and what you need to do, and then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways, and then obviously questions at the end as well. So thank you. So over to you, Georgia, to kick us off with our first question.
Yeah, so Shelley, I'd love you to explain to us what is triangular employment.
Thank you, Georgia, and thank you very much, Kathy, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. It's really lovely to be here and with the Tribe group, delighted. So a triangular employment relationship is not unexpectedly what it sounds like. It's a relationship with three parties. So we have our employer, and this is the agency who employs the employee, who actually has the employment agreement with the employee themselves, that's usually the temp or casual worker, and a third party who has been called in the law, and this is all covered off in an act called the Employment Relations Act, but that person is called the controlling third party. So that's the client. So that is you people out there, most likely. And you're the people who direct or control the employee's day-to-day work, their tasks, their supervision. So when you have someone coming into you from a temp agency, then it's that three-part tripartite relationship. And the typical example, obviously, as I've already touched on, is your labour hire, your temp arrangement, where the client is controlling the third party. And also, though, it can affect a secondment where someone is placed external to an organisation within another organisation who gives them their day-to-day work assignments. It's an interesting area of the law. It's very niche, so it only kind of applies to these specific types of arrangements. And it's relatively recent in the law, less than 10 years or so, I think it came into force. And so it's something that agencies and their clients have had to grapple with since that time.
Yeah, fantastic. And over to you, Kathy, for the next question off the back of that.
So why does the triangular employment matter, Shelley? So tell
Well,
us kind of the importance of it.
it's really interesting, as I've said, because I think historically when we've had temps working for us as organisations, it's been a little bit all care, no responsibility. You know, we can, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but we can usually remove temps without kind of any fear of any bad outcomes. There have been cases along the years which have, you know, tried to look at this relationship, but broadly speaking, as most people probably know, the employer-employee relationship is where the law sits and it's where the cases sit. And then I think that it came about from a sense that temps could sometimes be a bit harshly treated, not by their employer, but sometimes by the client. And so what the law does now is it says, okay, well, if this employee is in a bad situation and they have a claim called a personal grievance, and that can come under different headings, but essentially we'll just call it a claim against in their workplace, they can actually now join the client to the claim, that controlling third party, if that controlling third party's conduct has caused or contributed to the personal grievance, and they've told the controlling third party, the client, that this could happen. And actually the employer, so the agency, can do that too. And what that can mean is that if it actually turns out that the client has caused or contributed to the grievance, they can be asked to pay compensation. So it really is a whole new world. And I think people kind of have their heads around it largely, but actually a lot of people I think are a bit unaware of this. And it can be really difficult. So that those days of all care, no responsibility are kind of over. The other thing that is interesting in this area of the law is that there's a series of cases where the client has actually been held to be the employer and not the agency. And so obviously that is a difficulty and a complexity, especially if as the client you've thought, I can do what I like because this person isn't my person. Sometimes cases are saying, sorry, they were your person, or that the agency and the client were actually joint employers, which sounds strange, and it is a bit strange to be fair, but there is case law where that's happened. It's like, well, actually, you're both kind of in charge of this employment relationship, and so we're going to hold you both liable for something if something bad has happened in the workplace. So as I say, those days of all care, no responsibility, well and truly over for a little while.
Can I pop a quick question in there? So what are maybe some actions that might be deemed the controlling third party might do that would then make them the employer? Do you know what I mean? Where's that line, if you like?
So that's a really, really good question, and it's a complicated question because it depends on the facts of the case. But broadly speaking, if the client has been taking like sole responsibility and authority for the person, or almost sole, so they're kind of treating the person as if they were their employee as opposed to the agency's employee, that's when the court's going to look at it and say, look, if we look at this in reality, like who's in charge of you, who's employing you, who approves your holidays, your pay rises, who actually is your employer? We've got to say when we look at it, it's actually the client, or it's actually both of you. Between you do that job. And so and then of course, you know, there has to have been some action that's caused that liability. And so the classic example is where the agency, where the client says, don't send that person to me anymore, don't want them. And there's some unfairness in that. So obviously that may well be able to be justified, but if there's an unfairness, unreasonableness, for instance, it's, you know, based on discrimination, say, then that is where the client can be in the firing line.
Yeah. And what would you say are your most common, you know, things that might arise from a PG perspective?
It will usually be in that removal of the person. That the most common personal grievance by far is something called an unjustified dismissal. So where the person has been dismissed and it's been done unreasonably. And of course, you can see it from the point of view of the client. If if I don't have a contract with this person direct, I've got a contract with an agency, I can just go, do not send Shelley back tomorrow. Like, we hate her. She's annoying and she's a female. So like, get rid of her. And so, you know, that is this very sort of thing. I mean, very few employers behave quite like that. But I think historically you could, right? You could just ring the agency and say, get rid of that person, send someone else. There was very little that person could do about it. And their claim, you know, lay with the agency, like, you didn't protect me, or you didn't, you know, you didn't ensure the client was reasonable or whatever. But now it sits with both. And therein lies the reason for this webinar.
Yeah, and it just kind of emphasizes the key to communication between the three parties as well, right? So
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Shelley, we've had a question come through from the audience. In what circumstances might an agency temp worker working in a unionised environment for the controlling third party be considered as party to a collective employment agreement? Now, that may be one we can answer at completion, but did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think there might be some move to change this, but my current understanding is that ordinarily they wouldn't be seen because their agreement is with the agency. I suppose your risk around that would be that if the controlling third party is seen to be the employer, then that would be where that would arise. Yeah, that's my preliminary thought, but that is, thank you. It's a great question. Thank you. I will continue to reflect on that, may raise it again at the end, or it might be something that I can follow through with a comment that you could circulate afterwards. Yeah, I might reserve my position on that a little bit, as lawyers like to say.
Yeah, and that's actually probably a good segue into our next question, which is, but what about the contract?
Yeah. So, and I think that, unsurprisingly, clients might say, but, I've got a contract with you, with my agency that says I can get rid of this person anytime. And I think the reality is that what happens is the law will overshadow that. So if you are exercising that control, then your actions could contribute to the personal grievance. And so it's almost like it sits outside or as well as and on top of the contract. So you have your contractual rights. And the difficulty is, I was reading a few of the cases recently. There's not actually that much case law on this, but that control, are you exercising control over the temp staff in the day-to-day workplace? That's actually quite fairly easy to establish. And you can see why, like, unless you've got, you do get those temps that come in and they might be located in the client, but they really don't, the client's not supervising, controlling their work, or giving them instructions. They just happen to be located for convenience or to access the technology, and it all comes, through the agency. And that certainly there are instances of that. But in many cases, our temps, we actually do, go there, do that, come back at this time, go do that thing. And we do exercise. So it's quite easy to get across the line on control. It's harder to get across the line on that causing or contributing to the personal grievance. But again, it's cause or contribute. So it might be that what the client did was be partially involved, and that could still be enough to get a portion of the liability. And so I think that the fundamental, this is one of the key messages, it's probably what will be my key message at the end, which is that you can't assume because it's a labour hire or a temp contract as the client that you're absolved from responsibility. It's important to recognise that you could get in the firing line.
Yeah, and we have actually an audience question which ties into a question I have for you. So we've had an audience question basically asking, can it be unfair dismissal if we say don't come back tomorrow, even though the agreement has it in the contract that the employer doesn't need to give notice? But I have a follow-up question to that might help answer this in a more holistic way. If you are in a situation where you do require removal, whether it be immediate, of a temporary staff member, what steps should the controlling third party initiate to mitigate the risk?
Yeah. So the answer to the first part of that is, so yes, that potentially, it's going to depend on the circumstances. And the thing about employment law, as you probably know, is it's very, very fact-based. It's very dependent. So if I say something like, oh, removing someone will always lead to a grievance, like that's just a wrong statement. It may not be the case. It's going to depend on the reasons for the removal, the manner and method of the removal. Georgia, what was the second part? Sorry.
Apologies. It's if you are in a situation where you do require removal of a temporary staff member, what steps should the controlling third party initiate to mitigate any risk?
I didn't want to go off on a tangent there.
No.
The first thing to do, so thank you very much for repeating that. The first thing to do is to contact the agency and work in conjunction and communicate, because actually the agency is the employer. So it is if the person's employment is to be terminated, because they're two different things, right? There's removal from the site and there's termination of the employment, and they're two separate actions, and they may or may not, both be going to happen. But that is something that the agency is going to have to work with you on. So the first thing to do before you do anything is to contact the agency. We're going to talk a bit more about the contract in a second, but that would be my first and probably only piece of advice, because then you'll work together based on your contract as to who's got responsibility for what. And it is a weird kind of situation, because on the one hand, you don't want to treat this person like they're your employee, because they're not. At the same time, you can't treat them like they're a complete stranger for whom you have no responsibility for. So best advice, call your person at Tribe or your agent, whoever your agency is, and say, hey, we now have a problem with Shelley. Let's talk about how we're going to deal with this.
It's that high communication and that really tangible feedback. And yeah, again, that brings us to Kathy's next question, I imagine.
So what do you do?
Yeah, good question. So you have a commercial arrangement. Now, the important thing is that commercial arrangement sets out who has responsibility for what, and there's no rule around what there has to be. That's agreement between you and your provider. But
yeah.
It needs to cover off in principle, not necessarily that these things will be itemized one by one, but what you're looking for is, well, who's doing the induction, who's doing the training, who supervises, who can author, and that is, a lot of that might well be the client, may or may not be. Who can do changes to duties, changes to hours, changes to money, who approves leave, who performance manages the person, who takes disciplinary action, who will deal with grievances, who will fire the person. And that second list is more likely to be with the agency. But the key is that it's just having clarity, like making sure we know who's doing what. Who's going to be liable if it all goes bad? Your contracts will usually cover off on that. It's a good thing to know about, whatever that is. Again, there's no one way to do this. It's a case of your agreement. But when can we give notice to the employee? When can we say you're fired? How will we handle claims? And the key thing is that working together is crucial. Understanding this is crucial. Understanding what we both have, our rights and obligations of the parties, so that, then when something does happen, we know exactly what to do and who to go to. And if we don't know, the answer is go to your agency and ask them, hey, this has come up. I think I need to give this person a warning. This person has not turned up for work. This person, we want to give a pay rise. Happy days. We want to give a pay cut. Less happy days. Contact the agency.
Yeah, that's great. Again, kind of tying back to communication, I think, and just making sure that we're across everything where we can be and ahead of the game type thing, so we're not behind from that side of things.
Yeah, so if I do a question back to you on that, Kathy, so so what is from your guys' perspective, what is it that you're wanting clients to do?
High communication. Basically is to tell us when, and I think one of the big things for us is providing us with feedback in a timely manner, especially in relation to performance or productivity, attendance, anything along those lines. It's really difficult for us to manage those in arrears, if that makes sense. We kind of need to know about them up front. But for us, it's about clear communication, open communication, consistency in that communication. And that's part of what we do, and that's part of our kind of service levels, is to make sure that we're there to understand, every step of the way what's going on with that individual, so we don't get to situations where we are removing or ending assignments or terminating assignments. So it's just that clarity piece and communication, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you. And that does lead us quite neatly to this next point where, where we've said good onboarding is crucial for success, because actually I probably can even take a step from that and say good matching, And it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking, gosh, really, that's all employment agreements, right? All employment arrangements, whether they're triangular or not. What we really need is to understand what we're not happy with the employee, and communicate, in this case with the agency, in usual cases with our employee, about what's going on, and not leaving stuff too late. I mean, as an employment lawyer, I so often get called in, 6 months, 6 years sometimes, after the problem has manifested, and things need to be addressed. And so it's that good matching, it's that good onboarding, so that, employees understand what their performance requirements are, their KPIs, who they're reporting to, what they're supposed to be doing, and then the job and what the job is. Like, that is quite vital, right?
And it's interesting, Shelley, there with that onboarding piece, it's even small sections that you wouldn't think of, but if not addressed, could manifest into an issue, even things like dress codes, who to sign into on that first day, what time to start on their first day, health and safety, of course, and those checks in, beforehand. It's the basics that can really make up for that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because in my job, what I find often, it's it's often less what is done and kind of how it's done that, so it's not the fact that the person, didn't wear the right uniform. It's the reaction when they didn't wear the right uniform. It's the fact that they weren't told what the right uniform was or where to get it or, that kind of stuff. And they are, I mean, I think you made a really excellent point, actually, that it can be those really tiny things that derail. And they really do. I feel like I've seen just about everything in my line of work, but it is sometimes it's those really small things. And, it is, and I kind of touched on this before, but it is important that when you're the client, you are really conscious that this isn't your employee. They are the agency's employee. And I think if you've got that in your head, even just conceptually, it means that you're going to, you will come back to the agency because actually they're in charge of this person. You will communicate with the agency. You will, you won't just like go off half-cocked and start a disciplinary process with someone or fire them or, give them a warning or whatever, because you're actually conscious that, well, hang on a second, I've got a process I have to follow and this person actually isn't my employee. So stick to the agreement with the agency as to who is responsible for what, so that you don't accidentally go over the lines. And I think the hardest thing is probably with long-term temps, where they
We've got a question that I might throw in here, Shelley, which will lead into this. Because I think this happens a lot when people are on site for long periods of time. But at what point might an agency temp worker be considered an employee of the controlling third party?
Yeah, so there's a big kind of legal test around what's called the real nature of the employment. So in reality, looking at everything kind of together, is this person really the agency's employee still, or actually have they become in reality the client's employee? And I mean, there's tons of case law on this, and there's big cases at the moment about Uber drivers going all the way to the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court and so forth. But it is a lot to do with that control. So for instance, if the employer does start running disciplinary processes or does start doing stuff outside the agreement, then they're starting to assert control and authority over the person that an employer does. And if the person starts to become really integrated into the business, and obviously to some degree you want the person acculturated, you want them integrated, but when you're actually just treating them like they're just being treated exactly the same, and you've had a lineup of 100 employees, you would not be able to in any way tell the difference for the 1 temp worker or the 5 temp workers. That's when you start getting into trouble. And I think it's kind of, I think if that conceptual look, at the end of the day, this is not my person, this is their person, I think that actually helps guide what you do. And then take guidance from the agency about things you're thinking of doing. We're thinking of giving your person our 5-year service award because they've been with us for 5 years. Should we do that? Honestly, possibly not. Like that might be too much. They should get a 5-year service award if the agency has them from the agency, or whatever the agency does to recognize its long-term people, if it does indeed have those things. So it's things like that. Now, I've given you a very narrow example there, and that is because they are so heavily fact-driven. But if someone were to step back and go, to all intents and purposes, who does this person work for? Who does the relationship appear to be with? And if someone objectively would look back saying, I cannot distinguish between this person being your employee because you do everything exactly the same, that's when you're definitely at risk. Now, part of that is actually our next point, which is to make sure the employee knows who their employer is and that they don't get confused. So your temp workers who regularly, they get a call in the morning and they go here and they go there and they go all different, they know, they don't have a problem. But again, those long-term people can actually start to themselves get confused. And so it's important, again, that the agency and the client work together to just make sure that this person understands that they, whose person they are, because that actually really helps in claims. And it means that also if something happens at work, in the workplace with the client, they're more likely to pick up the phone, call the agency and say, hey, something's going on at work. You're my boss. Like, what do I do here? I'm unhappy with this. And, And I guess, like I've said, like we say there in the slides, don't assume they don't have rights, because they do. And communication, proactive, transparent, regular, two-way, it's vital.
No, understood. And we have quite a robust kind of process to check in and keep in touch with our temps whilst they're on site to try and mitigate any of any of this cropping up. So,
Yeah, brilliant.
but we are dealing with humans, so sometimes it's challenging.
100%. And look, that's fantastic. And because I think unfortunately what can sometimes happen is almost like a set and forget. Someone's planted in there, everyone forgets. They just, from then on, they're treated as one of the team. It just happens they're getting paid from someone else, but it's almost irrelevant. And that's where well, when I say that's where trouble starts, it's trouble for the client in reality, because they'll still have a claim against their agency as their employer, but then they might try to bring in the client as well.
Yeah, and it's that really clear articulation, which we do, and it's again those long-term ones. You have to be mindful of really clearly articulating that throughout, not just start.
Yeah.
So look, ladies, I'm conscious of time, and we've got 5 minutes to go, and we'll just run through some key takeaways, and then we'll open up the floor to any more questions. We've managed to rattle through some of the questions throughout the presentation, which is good. But key takeaways, I'll kick off just from an agency and from Tribe's perspective, and we've kind of gone through it all the way through, I think, Shelley, is that communication aspect is paramount, clarity and consistency in the communication, and then obviously the contractual part of things as well is hugely important. So yeah, that's kind of key from my perspective. I don't know whether there's anything more you want to add on that, Shelley.
Yeah, look, I think it's been a theme of this half hour, which is keep in mind that you're not the employer. Keep in mind that you need to engage with the agency when you want to take action in relation to the employee, and that action could be positive or negative. But just remember that, keep that front of mind. And I do think that it's really interesting when parties are in whatever the relationship is, if it's up here that this is the nature of it, that kind of shows through. And when it changes when it changes up here, because then that shows through as well. Like, people are consistent with their beliefs, right? So it's like, if I believe this person's my person, I'm going to treat them in a particular way. If I remember that they're, and it sounds a bit insulting to say remember that, but actually I think we do have to remember and remind ourselves, okay, I'm not the employer, so therefore who is, and I need to involve them. And then it's probably that other key point about liability, that actually in this current state of the law, you can become liable, so please don't think that you aren't.
Yeah. And anything that, if we could bust one myth about the Triangular Employment Agreement, what would it be? Any last words?
I would say that it is that piece, that last piece, that I'm not liable. Because I have had shock, expressed to me that, what do you mean? What do you mean? And it is, how can that be? How can we be, but we've got a contract, the stuff we've talked about today is real. And the myth would be that you're not responsible, because you potentially could be. You may not be, but you potentially could be. And understanding that temps are not, it's not a set and forget. It's not a risk-free arrangement anymore, but obviously a really useful and helpful arrangement for staffing our workplaces, and managed well is brilliant. So we're not against it, and the law's not against it. It's just let's not forget.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've got a couple of minutes maybe for questions.
Yeah, I've got a couple of quick fire questions, Shelley. So first one is, can hiring managers involve temps in team meetings, offsites, or goal setting? Where's the line with that sort of thing?
So again, it's a whole big picture thing. So yes, team meetings, and I think yes, offsites. I would probably want to just, clarity around that. Like, look, Shelley, as we know that you work for Tribe, but we'd really love it if you could come to the offsite, and then maybe even, Tribe, is that something that we can do with this person? Like, are you happy for us to do this? So there's just, it's just to let you know that we're doing this with Shelley. If you've got any objection, let us know. Just it's that communication. What was the third thing? It felt like golf. Did I hear golf?
Goal setting.
I'm glad it wasn't golf. It could be golf. Yeah. So I think you can. It's just remembering, their role and their kind of place in the scheme of things. What you get with these real nature of the employment is, because it's looking at the totality, it's almost like a thin creep. So one thing doesn't cause a problem. So can you do team meetings, offsites, goal days? Sure. But actually, also, they may be the things that take you over the edge. So again, I'm just going to go back to that communication and just kind of thinking, well, hang on, is that what we want? Do we want to involve our temp person? And if we are doing that, cool, but why? Is there a good reason? Well, yes, they've got experience and expertise. We want to great. But, let's have clarity around it. Or actually, do we decide that we know because that person's only with us for 3 months, actually, we're not going to do that because it sends us wrong message and we don't actually want to do that. So I'm not saying exclude them, but I think it's thoughtfulness around intentionality. Time for this one, Georgia. Was there one more?
Look, I think that last one might probably be one to follow up with. I think that's going to be quite an expanded answer.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So we've just got people asking.
Complex. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Shelley. No, we've just got people asking for the slides, and I think people are starting to wrap up now. So we absolutely can share the slides. And we'll collate, if there's any more questions that come through here as well, we will collate and answer them and push them out. So if we didn't get to your question, apologies, but we'll work with Shelley and see whether we can come back to you on those as well. But otherwise, a massive thank you, Shelley. We really appreciate and value your time. Thank you, Georgia, for hosting alongside me. And thank you for everybody for joining us as well.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.